The words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, our rock and our redeemer. There are passages in the Bible that cry out for context. There are passages in the Bible that scream for explanation and even sometimes apology, right? I'm sorry to have to read you this. Today's passage, however, doesn't seem to be one of them. Today, we can probably, if you're like me, assume something pretty straightforward. Two are better than one. And like many of the aphorism, a wise saying from Ecclesiastes, there's nothing to stop us from printing that pithy statement on a bumper sticker, right, if we wanted to, right? Or I can see it now on a plaque at Kauffer's Religious Books, or emblazoned on a t-shirt at the Lifeway Christian store, or scrolling across the marquee at some megachurch. Something like, Christians aren't perfect, just forgiven, or Jesus is my co-pilot. Two are better than one. It seems pretty straightforward, a platitude. But it's like, I don't know, it's like former President Obama said about a possible meeting with Mitch McConnell when a reporter asked the president if he'd like to have a beer with the Senate Majority Leader. Obama quipped, "Have a beer with Mitch McConnell? You have a beer with Mitch McConnell." In other words, for all the ways that two are better than one, and according to Ecclesiastes 4, right, it's pretty obvious. If somebody's walking up a hillside and one person falls, another person can pick that person up. If you're sleeping in the desert cold, one person can keep another person warm. But for all those ways, the two are better than one, I can think of just as many times when two has been hell, right? When two people having a conversation, even a father and son, even a husband and wife, even two long-time friends, sometimes two seems very difficult. There are also times when one person, and this is where I want to focus today, there are also times when one person lives so vicariously through the other person, you can't breathe. Right? Do you know what I'm talking about here? There are times when someone latches onto you so tightly that you can't tell when you end and the other person begins, or vice versa. There are times as well when one of the two can't be trusted. There are times perhaps when both people act out of narcissistic or ego-centered motives. And for these times, the statement two are better than one has to come with a little caveat. It has to be understood perhaps as aspirational, as hopeful. I hope two will be better than one. Back in Pennsylvania, I developed a friendship with another church pastor who was starting a new church development. And I'm going to change his name. His new church, met in a strip mall. And it was really kind of a creative enterprise. They had drama, and they had all kinds of interesting things happening, creative ideas being expressed, and they reached into many people's lives. Cheryl and I were starting another church miles away. And Daniel and I would meet at the pizzeria, and we would talk, and oftentimes he would listen to me very carefully. And you know how beautiful it is when you can tell someone is really listening to you, right? In other words, the person isn't trying to invent what they're going to say as you're speaking, they're actually listening to you, right? And he was a good listener. Two are better than one. But then after a while, after a few meetings, it became clear that when Daniel did talk, he always talked as the expert. He always talked as the one who knew everything. I didn't know anything. He knew it all. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I loved meeting with him and I appreciated his friendship. But after a while, I started to wonder, don't you have any vulnerabilities? Don't you have any weaknesses? Don't you have anything to which I can respond in some kind of mutual way and give you something back? He didn't want to be helped. He wanted to be the helper. Similarly, but from the opposite end of the spectrum, Caroline joined our small group Bible study because she wanted help. She desperately needed help. And she had no problem telling you all the issues in her life. And so when she joined the Bible study, and no matter what the discussion topic was on, Caroline would tell a story of woe and tribulation that invariably led the discussion back around to this: how can we help Carolyn? Every Bible study, every time, Carolyn needed to be the center of how we help. Codependency, according to Edwin Friedman, is a compulsion to control and or rescue others by fixing their problems. Codependency, it's not just for alcoholics or the children of alcoholics. It's a compulsion to control and rescue others by fixing their problems. And so, let's take up the famous twosomes of the Bible. And I guarantee if you went through the Bible, you would find many people who are closely, intimately related. None more so than Martha and Mary. Have you heard of them? In Luke's Gospel and also in John's Gospel, Martha and Mary were sisters. Their brother was Lazarus, who was raised from the dead. But what's fascinating about Martha and Mary is that Martha was so interested in cleaning and cooking and organizing the visit with Jesus that she never sat and listened to Jesus. And she complained to Jesus that Mary was not doing anything. And Mary's just so engrossed in the conversation. Two are better than one? How? How are two better than one? Take another couple. In Luke 24, they're traveling on the road to Emmaus. And one of them, named Cleopas, we just know the name of one, says about Jesus, to Jesus, who is at this point very mysterious, we had hoped he, Jesus, was the one to redeem Israel. Just think about the irony of that. They're talking to Jesus and they said, we had hoped he was the one to redeem Israel. We hoped he was the one to help us. We were the ones Jesus was supposed to help. And he didn't. To which Jesus replies, how foolish you are and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have said. Now I'm giving you these two examples because I think it saves Ecclesiastes 4, verse 9 from becoming a platitude. Two are better than one, and whenever two or three are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst of them. You know why two are better than one? Because it provides an opportunity for God to make both healthy. God to make both mutually, reciprocally, dynamically healthy. You see, one of the greatest ironies of the church today, even this church, is how everyone wants to help and how everyone certainly knows someone to be helped. But very few people wonder about the kind of codependent help we're offering and sometimes receiving. There's a great teacher named Stanley Hauerwas who once referred to the temptation of every minister, and this isn't just the minister's temptation, but every minister is tempted to be a quivering mass of availability. A quivering mass of availability. I'm here for you, right? I want to help you. But never understanding that the key to this relationship is reciprocal, right? Inviting Jesus into it somehow. On Tuesday, the day after Memorial Day, by contrast, I received word from Sydney Brown, Marilyn Stedman's daughter, that her mother had died. And Sydney just wanted me to understand how Maryland loved this church and all the people in it and all the folks that she had met through the years. And in her final years especially, she was really concerned about ecumenical relationships. You know what I mean? People that are thinking differently and how we can somehow provide a healthy opportunity for conversation. She was all about that. So I ended up going to the memorial service on Friday, and it was nice. And one of the grandchildren spoke, and he said how his grandmare, that's what they called her, grandmare, right, would always be in relationship with them, but not provide so much love and attention that they would feel dominated. And as an example, he said that he once mentioned that meatballs and smoky links were his favorite food. And then as an aside, he said they weren't. But whenever he came over, Grandmare, Marilyn, would always have a large supply of meatballs and smoky links. He said even when she didn't know I was coming over, she had a vat of meatballs and smoky links in the freezer, right? Just to kind of say, I know who you are, right? This is what you like. That little episode, it touched me emotionally as I watched this grown man who's now about 30 weep, right? At that simple gesture. It was just enough. It was just enough for Marilyn to say, I'm coming alongside you, right? I'm not going to control you. I'm not going to dominate you. I'm not going to enable you. I'm going to, what? Be next to you. Two are better than one. Now, I'm hesitating to do this, but I can't help myself. I want to bring in Soren Kierkegaard, the great Danish philosopher, and it's good that Christian's here because he's originally a Dane. Kierkegaard lived in the 19th century, and he is known for many insightful projects. But what you may not know about him is that he broke off an engagement with Regina Olsen. And no one, not one of his biographers, understood exactly why. The theory is, however, that because he suffered from depression, because his family was very melancholic, he couldn't trust himself to avoid manipulating his fiancée. And he wrote this: to stop a man on the street and stand still while talking to him is not so difficult as to say something to a passerby in passing, without standing still and without delaying the other, without attempting to persuade him or her to go the same way, but giving him instead an impulse to go precisely his own way. Giving him precisely the impulse to go his own way. Such is the relation between one existing individual and another. when communication concerns the truth. I'm wondering today about this neighborhood, right? And I'm really praying through my tendency to be codependent, right? To somehow need to be needed. And I'd like to invite you to think about that too, right? How can we freely give ourselves to this neighborhood and freely give ourselves to each other without a sense of, I don't know, manipulation or unconscious coercion, something like that. The passage in Ecclesiastes continues, "Better is a poor wise youth than an old foolish king who will no longer take advice." Think about that. One can indeed come out of prison to reign, even though born poor in the kingdom. Now, a lot of people look at that verse, it refers to King Saul, King David, King Solomon, one of those relationships. But it does trickle down to us today, right? Better to be born poor in the kingdom than to be an old, foolish king who doesn't take advice anymore. What's that sound like, right? To me, that sounds like intergenerational companionship, right? That sounds like some kind of encounter with the other person where we have mutual respect with each other. It's between races, it's between generations, it's between genders, it's between us and the children. Let's pray.